And TI Mentor, what it reveals is that to have substance is to have something that's worthwhile, that's actually solid and strong and will last when and if the reputation fades or the fame fades or the popularity goes away. There's still something there. There's still something in you because it's part of you that's substantial and true and integral and of integrity. Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. John here with Redemptive Psych. Welcome back to another video in our series talking about the interactions and the mechanics between the archetypes and the functions. In these next few videos, and in the previous couple, we've been talking about the cognitive mentors. A cognitive mentor is one of our shadow functions as connected to one of our higher functions. If we have a TI in our higher function, our mentor is going to be TE, the other half of the thinking or the sensing or the intuition function can act as our mentor. The reason it's a mentor is because we don't necessarily want to use it, we don't necessarily look to use it, but when we use it, when we integrate it into our awareness, it becomes a path to maturity, to deepening, and to skill in our types. Okay, so here on the first slide we have how TI mentors TE and two little subpoints here. How verification affects effectiveness and how substance affects reputation. Okay, integrating TI allows you to become more effective because TI is a validation, an internal validation function that helps you problem solve, that helps you see the deeper roots of what's really going on within your mind's eye. And then how substance affects reputation. TE is one of the functions, is the main function that's aware of reputation and the role of achievement and status in relationship to how you are perceived. And TI Mentor, when a TE user actually integrates TI Mentor, it allows them to become more substantive, and the pursuit of their achievements and their goals are not just for the sake of reputation. I already defined cognitive mentorship at the beginning a bit, but it is the process in general integrating these lower functions in order to become more mature and more skillful. This is the other part, okay, in the application of our functions. I said this in the last video on FI Mentor. When, for example, your hero function is very powerful, very capable, when you integrate the nemesis, which is the mentor, the potential mentor to the hero, you become a little more mature, a little deeper, things like that, but your hero function also becomes more powerful. The road to maturity and being a little more wise is hard. It can be painful. You are, your biases and your beliefs are stripped away, sometimes painfully, and you're kind of left out there naked, and you're more aware than maybe you want to be. But through that process, and on the other side of that process, a higher competency arises, on a technical level in the use of our functions. And there are spiritual elements to this. There are developmental elements to this of becoming a more generous person, a person of a greater generosity of spirit, just more depth. I think all of us have met people who we would describe as being deep, and then there's space in them, and there's a lack of judgment or condemnation that they have. And a lot of times that correlates, in my experience, with how well someone's shadow functions or their mentors have taught them and been developed in them. And it's not just that our own shadow functions teach us, it's that the cognitive mentors are developed, yes, by other people and the voices we let into our lives and the habits and the practices that we put forth. So at the bottom here is the question, do you know integrated people in your life? I put this here because one of the best ways to refine our sense of what integration looks like is to see it in other people. I just described some of the traits of integrated people that I've seen. they're deeper. They're a little more available. They're less judgmental. They're less quick to speak usually. They're less quick to conclude things about you, or about the world, about other people. There is a humility of ignorance of, hey, I don't know all the answers, but here's my experience, and here's what I value, and here's what I've seen work, and I believe that's important, and things like that. So do you know integrated people? How would you define an integrated person, and what do they look like in your life? Those are important questions for developing your sense of someone who has accepted the mentorship of their lower functions. Introverted mentors draw us inwards. This is an introverted function, T-I-F-I-N-I-S-I, right, in the shadow slots. Introverted mentors draw us inwards to develop pieces of ourselves separate from the influences of other people. Any heroes, for example, the ENPs, so captivated by what other people want, so aware of of what they're seeking and what they want and their goals and things like that. They can just kind of meld into those with other people. But through NI Mentor, for example, which we haven't talked about yet, but they develop their own sense of future and goals and visions, and it allows them to become less melded with everyone around them, for example. Extroverted mentors, on the other hand, push us outwards. They pull us out from our subjective, limited point of view to consider the realities and perspectives outside of ourselves. This is where, like a TI hero, for example, which we talked about TE mentor in the first mentor function, for like an INTP or ISTP. TE nemesis, TE mentor, pulls them outside of their own thinking. Particularly when it's used well, it allows them to regard other people's thinking with a curiosity, with an interest. So maybe there's some value there, even though I'm suspicious, even though I'm worried. They haven't thought through that well. I'm still going to consider it. I'm still going to ask questions instead of making so many assumptions, right? So extroverted mentors pull us out. Introverted mentors pull us inwards to become more of who we are, okay? We've probably met very extroverted people, for example, who don't really have any reflective practices or any reflective capacity in their life. That's someone who's missing out on a piece of feedback, a piece of internal development, because they haven't taken the time, or they don't take time to sit with themselves even for 30 seconds, right? Okay, so these are the types we're talking about today. Of the mentor series, this is the first time we're talking about TE-FI users. We just did 2 videos on TI-FE users, the cognitive mentor of TE for TI users, and the cognitive mentor of FI for FE users. So TI mentor for all the TE users, TI nemesis for the ETJs, TI critic for the ITJs, TI trickster for the ENPs, and then TI demon for the IFPs. Okay, so what is the function of TI mentor? And what I mean by function is when TI mentor is accepted as a mentor, because the natural relationship we have with our quote-unquote mentors is to not listen to them, to push them away, to stay in our more comfortable natural functions and tools. But when we, for one reason or the other, actually integrate the voice of the mentor, what does TI mentor provide? TI mentor helps the TE user lean more on their own thinking and empowers them to find unique insights. TE users are very, we could say, vulnerable and affected, impressioned by the thinking, the beliefs of other people. Now, it's not necessarily so far to say that if someone says something that they're just going to believe it. Credulity is a trait of extroverted thinking, but that's not always the case. What I see more of is TE users being part of a certain community or in a certain education system or a certain line of thinking, and that anyone who is within that agreement with like a church, for example, or a school or a company, your workplace, that they kind of play the game of, okay, these are the expectations, these are the ways to get ahead, these are the things you say and don't say, these are the beliefs here, And then anything outside of that is kind of judged as being, well, don't do that, or like that must be bad, or something like that. It depends on the type, of course. But what I'm saying is that TE users, FE users have a tribalism too, with what people around them value, things like that. It's similar with TE users. It's just about the standards, the expectations, the reputations of people. So what I mean by that is, I went to this church once, and there was a TE hero, an ESTJ teacher, and he did not want to share his opinion really ever. That was kind of part of the culture of the church. It was like anything we say has to be directly from the Bible. So he didn't want to share his opinion really. He felt uncomfortable with that. So that's just an example of how TE on its own can corner the TE user too much, restricting their behaviors to a point where they're not really allowed to ask themselves what they actually think, or let alone express that. So when they develop some TI, they can develop their own thinking and analysis separate from the standard procedures of whatever group they're around. TI Mentor helps develop a distinction between what is believed and what is true. This can be a really big issue for TE users, is that there is an osmosis effect of what you see on the news, or what you hear from certain people that you like, that, oh, it must be true, that's going to be the only basis for the opinion that I form. Now, every person has susceptibility to this, to a certain kind of bias that's similar, but TE users have it mostly with information, okay? I talked about credulity briefly, but when there's like religion or politics or these very polarizing topics, some TE users will really become isolated to one side because they're only taking in information from the one side, okay? And that can be an issue. So TI Mentor helps them develop a awareness that maybe there's some truth on the other side. And that's especially difficult in like a religious setting, when you attach a certain system or like a normal way of doing things to God, to the arbiter of right and wrong. When you make that attachment, it's going to be very difficult for a TE user to break free of that and say, wait, like is that way of doing that, or is that belief directly attached to God, or is that just someone else's opinion? Asking that question, beginning to ask that question, it's going to awaken the TE user, maybe more than they want to be awakened at first, but eventually it will secure them independence and freedom to have their own beliefs. Okay, TI Mentor can assist in the TE user's development of authenticity as reputation becomes something that's not just a be-all and end-all. Every type can be shallow in certain ways. TE users can be shallow through the temptation of basically making an idol of reputation and status. And it can be very difficult for them to break free of that, but it doesn't have to be an immediate process. It's okay if things take time, right? But authenticity, part of authenticity is, here's what I actually think. And I know that might be offensive. I know that might go against what is accepted here or what is agreed upon here, but here's what I think. And as we'll get to in the last section of the talk, is with the practical application. One of the very useful ways to integrate a TI Mentor is you don't have to come up with all the solutions. You don't have to posit something of, this is what I believe, this and that, and you can totally do that if you feel compelled to. One of the easier ways to do it, though, is to bring up disagreements, is to provide negation. Because a shadow TI function, with the exception of TI Trickster, which is a little bit more constructive overall, the other TI shadow functions are more aware of like the ways things are wrong or incorrect, or concerns about how that validity is not solid. So bringing forth concerns in validity is usually an easier way for a TE user to develop TI Mentor. But authenticity, being willing to say some things that are against the grain. TE users very much value discretion, and thank God that they do, because they save a lot of embarrassment and they help people maintain and develop great mindsets and things like that, and a lot of other things too. It's not just that, but they can get to a point. Basically, TI mentor forces them to become more substantial and substantive. I put that at the bottom here. Substance and criticism can become their friends. Very mature TE users actually can go out of their way to seek criticism and feedback, seeking out things that may be uncomfortable and may hurt a little bit, but that they know they will find some of the truth, and that will sharpen them and make them a better person. Okay, I have some quotes from Psychological Types on Jung's section in there towards the end, talking about TE. His first quote here that I have: when extroverted thinking is subordinated to objective data as a result of overdetermination by the object, it engrosses itself entirely in the individual experience and accumulates a mass of undigested empirical material. He's talking about a trend here with TE users. Okay, one thing I need to mention, and I meant to mention this in the previous mentor videos. The nature of these videos is going to have is going to apply the most to the high TE users in this example. The TE heroes, the TE parents. It will apply, yes, to the other types, and the same for the mentors, but it's most prominent for the hero function and the parent function. When Jung is talking about these functions, he's primarily, I think only talking about the hero function, or he called the superior function. So he's talking about ETJs here, but this tendency can exist with all TE users, but just some context. Okay, so this quote, I'm especially interested in this last part. He's talking about the tendencies of TE users, particularly high TE users, accumulates a mass of undigested empirical material, kind of as a habit, and not necessarily in the face of not knowing what to do or not seeing clearly of what is true. They can just accumulate more information, and that is counterproductive often, and we'll talk more about that. But that is the tendency of TE when it's not mentored by TI, not to dig through what you have, but to just accumulate more. And somewhere in this mess of information, there's something they believe, but they can drown in the abyss of too much information, too much data. And that is probably more true today than I would imagine any time in history. There's so much information, and it's hard to decide, to figure out what's true, what's valid, things like that. Okay, second quote here. When objective data predominate over thinking to any great extent, thinking is sterilized, becoming a mere appendage of the object and no longer capable of abstracting itself into an independent concept. I mentioned that the teacher at the church, and I like that guy actually. He was a good teacher and effective, but as an example, him being very uncomfortable to share his own opinion, I'm not even sure if he allowed himself to develop his own opinion. Thinking becomes sterilized. Sterilized thinking just means you always refer to what someone else said, or this is what the research said, or this is what the text said, or this is what this author I follow said, or this is what this guy I listened to about news said. And it's only that. There's nothing else. There's no other substance there except for reference to what someone else said or did or whatever. What do you think, TE user? What do you not think? Is it possible that there's something that they said that you question? Do you allow yourself to question that? Okay, yes, it's uncomfortable. And you don't have to do it all the time, but do you do it ever? So that can be a great exercise. Yes, you're aware of the data. You're aware of the other opinion. You're aware of the perspectives. Dig into one of them or two of them. Dig into it. Okay, that's what TI does. It digs into information. Okay. TI mentor integrations, signs of integration via some quotes here that I have pulled. Einstein had this great quote: "Any fool can know. The point is to understand." Now, this is, yes, a TI bias of most likely an INTP from Einstein, okay? But the point here is important, that when a TE user moves away from just wielding information and reference points and goes into an actual fundamental understanding of it, which they'll find out takes time and takes patience and takes a lot of thinking and takes a lot of error in thinking. But when they are willing to walk through that process and they develop understanding, there's something fundamental, there's a root that they find, at least in that particular topic, that becomes this sort of organic tree of knowledge and understanding that grows within them. And it's not just about information and data and reference points. It's something that becomes part of them, their understanding, that is separate from, what whoever said something else or whatever, right? Second quote here from Sir Isaac Newton, as I was reminded today. Truth is ever to be found in simplicity and not in the multiplicity and confusion of things. Okay, you can probably see how this relates to Jung talking about the tendency of TE as a function to overcomplicate, to collect more, right? More data, more data, more data. But me as a TI user, partly, I have very little TE. I've had to develop it to use it a little bit because I have to function in my pursuits. But I function best with simplicity because I don't have any much TE. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that I have found that simplicity makes things so much easier, and that, at least in my experience and in my perspective, finding something of substance and of truth and something that's solid is usually a simple thing. It's not to say that you don't think hard and you don't think about complex things, but as your understanding begins to grow in a certain topic, the path forward to something solid and true, and the answer, the quote-unquote answer, is usually one of simplicity. So it's not about one of the reasons that TE users are also FI users, because FI is a filtration of quality, okay? So it's good to be objective and take in both sides of the field, sure. But FI can help the TE user also be, filter out things that are not of quality. TI does the same thing, just in a different way, through the filter of validity. That's not valid, therefore, either this whole piece of information is compromised, or at least this train of thinking is compromised. Simplify, 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 okay? It's not just about more information, it's about going deeper and simpler into one piece of information you have, one article, one podcast, and then maybe comparing it to one or two others, okay? Last here, this is from Francis Bacon. This is more about the reputation, the achievement side of TE, and the TI mentor's ability to develop substance, or to initiate a development of substance in the TE user. Fame is like a river that beareth up things light and swollen, and drowneth things weighty and solid. TE users have a temptation to become airy and unsubstantive. They may become famous, or they may have a great reputation wherever they go. But is there anything under that? And sometimes there is. Sometimes there's someone who's really been through the fire and they have a great reputation that they've earned, and they are someone of substance too. Other times it's just someone who knows how to play the reputation game. TE childs are very vulnerable to this, especially. I would say the childs and the heroes, but especially the childs, because reputation is so accessible to them. They know how to get a good reputation or how to look good. But is there substance under that? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. And TI Mentor, what it reveals is that to have substance is to have something that's worthwhile, that's actually solid and strong and will last when and if the reputation fades, or the fame fades, or the popularity goes away. There's still something there. There's still something in you, because it's part of you that's substantial and true and integral and of integrity, and not just managing a reputation, managing how people perceive you. Okay, then I have two verses here that I feel are very relevant to developing TI and an awareness of how TE without any TI manifests in dark ways. This is this famous verse from 2 Timothy 4:3. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. I'm sure this has been true in every era or eon of human history. Again, like the information overload, I'm not sure it's ever been more true than now. But here is an example, a practical example of what TE, when it neglects TI, what it results in is they only use their TI to dismiss other people's point of view. They have a very narrow, acceptable field of which they will listen or hear, and that is just affirming the things they already believe, or they already feel, they already want, things like that, okay? It takes a person of substance, or it takes a moment of courage and substance to expose yourself vulnerably to something you don't want to hear, or something that you don't want to say. I think it works both directions. And to really consider something that disrupts your status quo, okay? Now, this part is a little hard for me to relate to directly, because being TI child and TE trickster, I would say overall I'm like kind of interested in hearing a variety of perspectives. I'm sure there's bias there that I'm not always aware of, but I know for TE users this is a greater obstacle in general. TI users have the problem though where it's like a shadow denial of perspectives. TE users, I'll just leave it at this. It just takes some courage, and it takes a willingness to be a person of substance and integrity for a moment, at the very least, to open yourself up to something maybe you don't want to hear. And this starts with just asking yourself, are there things I'm not willing to hear? Are there realities that I'm not willing to tolerate? And there are truths and realities that you're not willing to tolerate. That's true for all of us. But the point is to become more aware of them, okay? TI Mentor reveals to us, can reveal some of the things that we are in denial about. And denial is what this Timothy verse is talking about. One of the things it's talking about. It's like pre-denial. I'm not even willing to get to a point where I would consider it and then deny it. I'm denying it ahead of time because it doesn't meet my criteria of what I want to hear. Very dangerous, very destructive. And if you're paying attention to at least American culture, and I think this is happening worldwide, this is happening everywhere. And the state of things are a reflection of that. A big reflection of that. Okay, second verse here from Psalm 49, 16 through 17. Do not be amazed when a man grows rich, when the splendor of his house increases. For when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His abundance will not follow him down. Substance, substance, substance. Where is the substance? Is it in your pocketbook, in your money, in your achievements? Those can be great things. Those can be valuable things, actually. But is that the deeper truth of who you are? Is this just what you live for, right? This is what TI Mentor allows us to question and ask, am I just living for the shiny stuff, right? And again, I've met TE users who are totally seduced and swallowed up by the pursuit of achievement and reputation and the shiny things. And I've met TE users who can enjoy those things and they're aware of them, but they've chosen, for one reason or another, to live a life of substance, to pursue something that is that risks going against what their group or their family or their upbringing may think, right? And pursue integrity for themselves, whatever, again, whatever that may look like. Okay, so let's get into the types here of how this manifests specifically. Again, this is going to be, this pre-information is most relevant to the high TE users, but again, it's relevant to all the types too, for all the TE users too. Okay, ENTJ, ESTJ. This is the TE heroes and TI nemesis. TI nemesis mentor reveals the limitations of the heroic wielding data, knowledge, and achievement. This is a mix of the over information and the substance. TI nemesis, okay. TE heroes, it's so easy for them to just go get more information, and they're also very good at taking that information and putting that into a productive implementation or a plan, to act on the information. But if there is not a moment's pause between taking the information and then going to act on it, or like just going to pursue something because it's shiny, if it's not a moment's pause to question the substance and the validity of that information or that pursuit, then there is a failure of TI mentor integration. Okay, the nemesis starts as an enemy to us because it's an enemy to our hero. But then when we sit down and listen to it, it becomes a friend, because there's a trope in storytelling that there is a antagonist. There is a person a character that looks like an antagonist that when confronted in a certain way or at a certain point in the story, they're actually revealed to be a friend, right? Even though they may be a positive counterforce to the hero or the protagonist. Okay, TI nemesis tests for and against the validity of commonly held perspectives and beliefs. This is a more specific application of the verification. It's not just thinking, well, not everything I read is true. Good. What is not true about it? What is true about it? They become more suspicious of the majority held beliefs. They become more capable of divorcing themselves from the tyranny of the majority, basically, or the tyranny of the minority. Either way, they become capable of separating themselves a bit from the influence, from the beliefs, from what people are saying, and actually digging into the information on their own, right? Okay. And then lastly here, this kind of goes without saying, but it pushes the ENTJ and ESTJ to develop their own thinking. Okay, it's not just about finding the best quality information, though that's very important. That's a part of it. But it's about taking time, at least a little bit of time, for something. It doesn't have to be for all information. No, that takes too much energy, most likely. But for something, for some piece of information, for something that you're going to act upon, to actually think through it yourself too. And again, like I said, one of the easier practical ways to do it is to voice your concerns with the integrity. You don't have to go make your own new system necessarily from the ground up. At least put your concerns forward, put your concerns about validity forward. That's what TI in the shadow mostly does, okay? It's about revealing, it's like negative, I label it negative thinking. What it just means is thinking about the negatives, about ways things could go wrong, or the ways that things are wrong in an information sense. Okay, the ITJs. I will say, it's my belief that the ITJs of all the TE users are the least susceptible to the conformity pressures of groupthink, even though, of course, it does still happen. But I think on average, they're the least susceptible to it. And I think it's because of TI critic, because TI critic has a built-in kind of independence monitor. Okay, so INTJ, ISTJ, the cognitive mentor of TI critic, delays and restricts the ITJ's comfort with making conclusions. Okay, TI as a function is a function of that often too easily makes conclusions. Okay, they think through it and on their own, this is true, and then they move on without consulting other reasons, without consulting any TE or rationale. Right? What the ITJs do when they're using TI mentor is they very much delay the time and the, how would I say it? Like how aggressively they are willing to share a conclusion. They're much more subtle with it. Like, well, we examined this and we found this here, and then we looked at this and we found this here. So we're not exactly sure where the emergent truth is, but it's on this path between these two reference points here, okay? And this is the last point of the first sentence here. Follow the facts, okay? They follow the information. They follow what's revealed as, that seems like that's not true there. I'm going to go investigate that. It's a hesitance to make a conclusion, but this is where they become very careful thinkers, okay? TI mentor it's not necessarily just about reaching a conclusion. It's about accepting the challenge of not knowing and accepting the reality that the people that you listen to, they may not know either, or they, at the very least, they don't know everything, and not everything they say is true. And that's the lesson of TI critic especially. It's not just about putting it forward, it's about recognizing the limitations of thinking as a whole, but still committing yourself to develop quality habits of thinking, okay? I'm going to jump to this last point here. TI critic pushes the ITJ to develop great habits of thought, meaning it's less about getting the answer right and developing a system of thinking where over time you will arrive at the truth, or you're going to eliminate most or all of the falsehood, and the only thing standing will be the truth, okay? I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. It's kind of a subtle point that in like a sports example, part of this is becoming progression a little bit when you're thinking instead of outcome. It's not just about getting the right answer. Do you have the habits in place, the processes in place, the disciplines in place to have a great way of thinking, okay? Do you just blindly accept information when you hear it? Or do you question about it? Where did this come from? What is those person's qualifications? That's kind of how a TE user operates. But then, naturally, but then you dig into the information. Okay, is this true? Does this match my experience? Could it be true? How could it not be true? Things like that. Okay, the habits of quality thinking. This is what the parent-critic relationship, in this case with the ITJs, can be the best at. Okay, developing the habits of our minds and others. And then I put here in the middle, there is a great danger in underemphasizing their own thinking while overemphasizing others' thinking. That's the nature of the critic, of an introverted critic especially. It's a self-accusation, a self-attack. And in light of that, there is a tendency to over-elevate others, even though those other people may be very dangerous to listen to or not very well. People who don't think through things well. Okay, third here, the TI trickster, the TE child, the EFPs, the ENFP and the ESFP. This is, in my opinion, the most interesting shadow mentor. I mentioned that before because it deviates from the other mentors in that the tricksters is kind of like adventurous, constructive, like it's building things and like tearing them down and then building more. It's more forward moving, right? It's kind of like a playground of building things instead of being, a more mature critic of how to dissect and deconstruct things. For the TE child, the TI trickster is a playground of truth. The truth is a playground to them in relationship to perspectives. Okay, I was trying to find a clip in this moment in National Treasure when they find, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but they find these glasses attributed to Benjamin Franklin that are, they have this lens and then they have two other lenses of different colors above it, and you can shift those lenses in and out, and then they look at the back of the Declaration, and the initial image says something, and then they lift a lens, they look at it in a different lens from a different light, and something else emerges. And then they do it over here. A different light, a different lens, something else emerges. TE is the function of lenses and perspectives, okay? And it's about the reference points. What does it look like if I look at it from here? Okay, I see that. And as long as that object is real, this is a piece of the truth. I look at it over here. Something different emerges, okay? This is the process where the TE users build out awareness because they look at things from different perspectives. or they look at one thing from different perspectives, right? To try and get the whole image, the whole possibilities, the whole spectrum of reference points. Often it's impossible to get an entire, exhaustive set of reference points, but you can get at least several, right? And this is how TE works as a whole. And TE child, this is their road to using the trickster in a way where it's not just, avoiding or missing the truth altogether. But that's how they, sitting on their sandbox playground, looking at things in different ways, trying out different lenses. TE is the lens, right? The lens with which you look through something and how that affects your interpretation. The temptation for TE childs, okay? The temptation is to merely justify one's established perspective. TE childs are so good at justification. TE users are so good at justification because they can build the rationale to make this look like a sensible opinion. And maybe it is, and maybe it's true, or maybe it's a load of garbage that has this beautiful wrapping that looks, it passes the test, but once it's open, there's nothing there, right? So they have the temptation to have opinions that are not substantiated, but they can justify in these very convincing ways. TE childs are great at this. So here's the challenge then from the trickster when the trickster is used well, not just to justify the ENP's own perceptions. Will you justify the other side? Think about the thing, TE child, that you want the least to be true. I really don't want this to be true. Can you justify that it could be true? Can you use your power of justification and thinking and awareness of perspectives and different beliefs to make a justification for why that could be true? And if you can do that, you will find often little pieces of truth here and there through that process of courageously willing to look across the aisle, and instead of potentially demonizing that side of the aisle, because TE users also do that through making people look bad, but instead look at it as a possibility for truth. And with time, they become less threatened by the things that threaten their perspectives, and they embrace the adventurous journey, and it is adventurous, of looking everywhere, searching everywhere, seeking everywhere, not making so many assumptions or presumptions, but trying out their rationale and their perspectives on perhaps everything, or at least many things that they come across. Their FI parent can help them protect themselves from exploring things that are really not ready, that they're not ready to explore, or that would not be good to explore. Okay, the trickster is a pool of infinity. It can be overwhelming. It can be too much. But when harnessed, it takes us on this grand adventure. We don't have to eat up all of life in one bite. That's how we drown in the abyss, right? But being willing to go to the other side of what we're familiar with, the other side of what we're comfortable with, the other side of what we believe and what we hold as important. Maybe it's not as important or as true as we hoped it would be. So will you justify the other side? Will you go to the side that you potentially really dislike and justify that perspective? If you can do that, you'll start to see some more nuggets of truth emerge and be unlocked because of that maturity, because of that generosity, because of that courage, and because of TI trickster becoming TI mentor, embracing the adventure of that. And then last year, the truth, capital T truth, emerges from the exploratory excavation of all relevant lenses and points of view. Not just the points of view that you like, the points of view, the entire spectrum of perspectives, okay? Through looking at all the different things, with those glasses, with the different lenses, what is consistent, or what is emerging across the pattern of what you have learned and what you have looked at. That is probably a sign that whatever is emerging is the truth, or close to the truth, or at least a step on the path to the truth. And if you want to be someone of substance, T childs, which I've met some of you who very much are, and some of you who very much are not. If you want to be someone of substance, you allow yourself to value the truth above just the management of perspectives. And we're going to talk about this even more in just a moment with the INFP and the ISFP. Okay. TI demon to TE inferior for the INFP and the ISFP. There's a temptation, a big temptation, to disregard all realities in favor of upholding the realities or the assumed realities related to one's values. Okay, this is how FI hero blocks the minter of TI demon. So there is usually, I wouldn't say usually, there is sometimes to often a pure intention here. INFPs and ISFPs, I would say especially INFPs with the abstraction, but both, they're aware of the damage that too much truth can have, okay? There is a reality that sometimes people are not ready to hear certain things. And by saying a true thing in the wrong moment or at the wrong time, it might destroy a person. I believe that's true. The truth is not something that's just, it's kind of like concentrated juice. It's like it needs to be, you need to add water and mix it up and dose in small amounts. Otherwise, it can kill people. And, there's that famous quote from, I don't know, a politician, a president or philosopher about, is it John Henry? I don't know. But about, if the truth will kill them, let them die. Now, in the context he's talking about, that may have been perfectly appropriate. But just taking that quote out of context, be very careful. The INFP and ISFP are very careful with this. Dying is not helpful if if it could be avoided by waiting to say something. If someone's not ready for the truth, just a little piece, a little nugget, a little pebble in their shoe, as one apologist said in his book, Greg Kokel, I think. Anyway, one little pebble can be disruptive just enough where it gives that person a choice. They're aware that something's off. Are you willing to accept the reality of this pebble, or are you going to pick it up and throw it away? Okay? So I want to say that because no one is more aware of this, in my opinion, in my experience, than the INFP and the ISFP. Truth is a sword, often. And you can use the sword to cut away the rot and cut away those loose strings and cut out the things that are causing destruction to people. Or you can chop someone's head off with it. And most of the time, that's not a responsible application of truth. And the reason that INFPs and ISFPs know this is because they are susceptible to the overzealous use of truth wielders, because it can cause total annihilation, potentially. Okay? But with that being said, the INFPs and ISFPs still have a great temptation to be the person who there's a pebble in their shoe and they're going to take it and throw it away because it's more important for me to uphold my values and the softness there than to take on some of these harsh realities. And the reality of the demon integration, and I'll probably make a video on this or a series on this, is that the best consistent way to do it is kind of like exposure therapy, little doses at a time. You don't need to go swallow the entire realm of the hidden truth about the world, INFPs and ISFPs. You may not recover, as most of you well know. And then at the last point of this first sentence here, the role of judgment, it's kind of just related here to FI hero judging something as, we can't go there, or I'm not willing to look at that because it doesn't align with my values. That person, what they're saying doesn't align with my standards. Maybe they have some of the truth that you are pushing away because of FI hero's bias. Be very careful with that. When TI demon's working with TE inferior and emboldening them to look, right, and not just to swim in their own opinions and their own values over and over again, right? When they're exploring, TE inferior becomes the surgical extractor of others' thinking, the very, very careful, nuanced understanding of what that person thinks or believes. absorbing their reasoning, being able to weigh through it with their FI hero and FE nemesis, being able to weigh through it and extract value and understand the perspective. And through the commitment of that, again, like the TE childs, being willing to expose themselves to perspectives that go against their FI hero. Ouch! It's very difficult for them because their FI heroes holds, at least subjectively, holds so much goodness and warmth. And often, good intentions. Not always, but often. The TI demon also will reveal to them that all their intentions are not necessarily as good as they thought. But that's true for all of us. Okay, and then lastly here, revelation follows when the pursuit of truth, not just mere knowledge, especially you INFPs, not just mere achievement, especially you ISFPs, but the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of the naked realities. When they pursue the truth, revelation comes when the pursuit of truth triumphs as the apex value, as it integrates fully back into FI hero, and it says the most valuable thing has to be the thing that is also true, that is also valid, that is also solid, and can withstand the test and the barrage of other people's opinions, other people's disagreements, other people's biases, my own biases, that regardless of what people think or say, it doesn't go away. There's a quote I almost used, someone famous said it, I don't remember who, but the truth doesn't go away if you ignore it. It doesn't go away if someone says something bad about it. It doesn't go away regardless of what is said or not said. It stays there. And if you commit yourself to finding the thing that stays there, regardless of what is said, regardless of the reputational attacks, it will stand strong, because the truth, at the end of the day, is an immovable object. You can cover it, you can bury it, but there it will stay, and eventually it will be unearthed again. That is the inevitable reality of truth, as far as I'm concerned, as far as my opinion goes. And I think that's true. I think that's true as a pattern of life, that the truth will stay. So, yeah, guys, that is, no, one more section. Practical application. I had a harder time digging out kind of specific practices. I think it's easier, at least I had an easier time with articulating it for FI Mentor, because it's about personal expression largely. But I have some of these things. I've mentioned some of these things throughout the video. Practice of functional criticism. Okay, T users can criticize with things not being up to the right standard or not aligning with their own values as a FI user. But functional criticism can help force them into, okay, what is not working about this? Why is this not good? And try and get specific about the mechanics of the thing. You may have to sit with it for a while. But if you disagree with it, with a system or a decision someone made or a conclusion someone reached or an action someone did, looking into like the mechanics of it, what didn't work about it? Okay, try and dig inwards. It'll be harder if you have lower TI. It'll probably take longer, but you can take one problem and like sit on it for a while, and you'll be able to integrate some TI into it. Negation thinking, which I talked about, which is just voicing why you think something may not be true or may not work. That's how most of the shadow TI functions, except for TI Trickster, it's a little unique, work in that it's easier to articulate how you may disagree with the validity of something rather than proposing this whole new thing, right? That will come if you use TI enough, but the responsible use of a shadow function is usually protection. It's like filtering out things, okay? So it's okay to focus more on why you might disagree with something, why you think it may not work, why you think it doesn't hold up. Use your TI to, appropriately attack the opinions that you come across, So, and then articulate honest responses. This is an item of reflection. So, T users will often not say things or say things they too can keep the peace, even though FE users are kind of more focused on that, but they keep the peace through discretion and like not destroying someone's reputation or not making them look bad necessarily, even though they also may do that. But you know, after that action happens, or maybe during the conversation, asking yourself, what do I actually think? Do I have thoughts on this? Maybe you don't, and that's fine, but maybe you do. Probably you have at least one tinkering thought back there about it. Listen to that thought. Is it right? Is it wrong? Who cares? Listen to it. Develop a conversation. Develop a dialogue with your TI. That is how it is developed. You make a connection with it, right? It doesn't matter if you're always right or wrong with it. It's walking through the process of believing that it's worthwhile to have your own thoughts, even if they're not always right. Who cares? It's just you recognizing humbly that you won't always be right. That's not the point. It's about developing the dialogue, the conversation, acknowledging your TI. Okay, shred your own cheese. No commentaries practice. I've made the comparison that TI is a cheese grater. One of the ways TE users like to study is in reference points. Okay, they might have a primary text, like they're reading, I don't know, the Bible, or like a philosophy primary text, or something that, you know, that really important person in that field wrote. And then they'll like go research other articles and other opinions, and they'll get on Reddit of who thinks what, or, you know, your interpretation of this, and then consume a lot of secondary sources. If you just sit with the primary source, and yes, you take in what they say, but then you put your own thoughts forward too. Not consulting the commentaries at first, you can do that later, but, you know, maybe with one piece of information you come across as a primary text, think through it for yourself. Have a few thoughts that you commit to exploring. What do I think about this? What do I think about what they said? That makes me feel like that goes against my value, but is it true? Could it be true? Why, right? So having a practice of a focus of just having the primary text and articulating your thoughts in reaction to that. I'm going to jump to the bottom point because this is related here. Taking a reference point, this is a reflective exercise. What someone says, what they wrote, and then having your thought come from that. Okay, what do I think in reference to the reference point, right? Just a reflective practice. And then last here, this is sort of a therapeutic thing, but it can happen with friends. Friends are, if you have good friends, this is great. Suspended judgment leading to airing it out, and then the question, is that the proper use of a safe space? A safe space is a place where you are safe to be you without judgment. A TI shadow function, particularly a nemesis, critic, and demon, especially the demon, are going to have some thoughts, and some thoughts that may be quite nasty, and some thoughts that may really offend people if you said them. Do you have a space where you can just air it out and say all these quote-unquote terrible things, some of which are probably true actually, at least a small percentage, where you can just air it out, get it out there, okay? This is the shadow function. Doesn't have an opportunity to express itself in a place without judgment. And I know for like INFPs and ISFPs, it's very hard for you guys to like feel comfortable and safe enough to just kind of to take off the filters of your TE inferior and just let it out, right? Remember when I was typing Dua Lipa, who I believe typed as an ISFP, she was talking, or it was referred to in the interview about her having this friend where she can just go to and be herself around and doesn't feel like she has to manage expectations or perception. Having a space for that is great. And if you don't, you can do it with yourself in a journal. You know what's interesting? It actually takes courage, even if it's just you and a blank page, to just let your mind go and write out whatever's there. And it doesn't mean that what comes out is you, but it does mean that those things probably need to come out, because otherwise they're just sitting there without your awareness potentially and affecting you, okay? So this is a Jungian principle of shadow integration. the things we're not aware of in our shadow still affect us. They're still working behind the scenes. And TI, mentor integration, shadow integration, TI mentor integration is about getting in touch with those thoughts, letting them come out, okay? So either you have a space and a person you can do that with, or you can do it on your own. But airing it out, you'll be scared of some of the things that come out, and not all those things are like representative of you. Sometimes they're just thoughts, okay? But getting a look at what's actually in there can be very important. I would urge some caution with that. You know, you don't have to, what's that quote in the Lord of the Rings, or maybe The Hobbit, where he's talking about the dwarves digging too deep, mining too deep, and oh, oops, there's like this big demon Balrog there. Don't mine too deep, but you kind of have to experiment a little bit to figure out where that too deep is. So again, especially with the demon function, but with the shadow functions, little doses at a time can go a long way. So we're going to wrap up there, guys. That's TI Mentor, how TE users can be mentored by TI. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys got something out of it, and I'll see you in the next video.